Welcome back to the OPEX podcast. On today's episode, I am joined by co-founder of the Functional Movement Systems, Lee Burton. On this episode, Lee and I discuss everything to do with optimizing human movement for performance, health, and longevity. Guys, this was a great discussion with Lee. I know you're going to love it. Stick with us. Mr. Lee Burton, thank you so much for making time to come and speak to me today. I really do appreciate it. You are an individual who I have a ton of respect for, as well as everyone else involved with functional movement systems. So how are you doing?
Good, Robbie. Thanks for having me on, man. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, anytime. Lee, one thing I've actually really wanted to ask you, when I would have you on a podcast or in a personal conversation, tell me more about you. Everyone kind of knows Gray's background. Everyone knows, even Brett Jones. He's Brett and his bit of oddness. I like Brett, and then even we're all well aware of Charlie and sort of where Charlie came from. Charlie Weingroff. He's a big FMS advocate as well. But you're kind of the quiet sort of in the background. Right. We know you were one of the early founders. You were there from the start, but no one really knows who the hell Lee Burton is. So, tell us more. People kind of know where you're from, but tell us more about your youth, your family, your upbringing, sports, college. Give us a little more into you.
Oh yeah, of course, Robbie. I like being in the background, man. I don't like giving away too many of my secrets. I like just sitting back and letting those other guys take and run with it.
See, it's the quiet ones you got to watch out for. It's like that episode. It's like that episode of The Simpsons where Bart's like, "If I ever died, I'd come back as the butterfly." And they're like, "Why the butterfly?" Because nobody suspects the butterfly.
Exactly. It's exactly the way I like to keep it. But no, man. Actually, it's funny. Gray and I grew up together. Most people don't realize that his father was our family's minister in our little town. Gray and I both grew up in a smaller area in rural Virginia. And I grew up on a farm. So, I think, and quite honestly, I think growing up on a farm, working, getting up at, 5 a.m. to work until 6, during the summers, from the time I was probably 7 or 8 years old until I went away to college. I think that probably instilled a lot of my work ethic, a lot of who I am today, just that upbringing. I worked, my dad owned a car dealership, and on Saturdays I'd work for him. So my dad had me punching a clock, going in, and I had to punch a clock. If I didn't punch the clock, I didn't get paid. So I think that type of work ethic and that type of family environment definitely led to a lot of who I am as a professional. And what I mean by that, Robbie, is it's not so much, it's about trying to do the right thing. It's about, hey, this is the right thing to do. It's not so much trying to seek out the buck or the dollar, which, let's be honest, we all want to make money. But it's about ultimately trying to do the right thing. And I think the fact that, Gray and I growing up together in that area and knowing each other and our families knowing each other all our lives, we pretty much are like brothers. And you don't see that a lot in this profession, in any profession. The fact that Gray and I have been working together in the professional world for over 20 years now, probably going on 24, 25 years. And I think a lot of that has to do with how we grew up together and have known each other all our lives. We fight like brothers. We don't always agree. We definitely push each other quite a bit. But I think that probably has allowed us to sustain our professional relationship just as much as our personal relationship, is just having that background. And I played sports. I was more of a baseball player, always playing sports. I think the one thing Gray and I kind of say now is because of where we grew up, we were always having to do more with less. We didn't have a lot of, we played sports. There was not a lot of being in the rural country area. That was not a lot else to do. So I think that kind of laid the groundwork for being more into the sports performance world. So I played a little bit. I played enough in college to realize I didn't need to play in college. And the biggest thing about playing college sports is it interfered with my extracurricular activities, because I like to have a beer every now and then. So I realized sports and my extracurriculars didn't necessarily mix. And the big thing is I wanted to pursue graduate school and go on. And so by doing that, it gave me, the ability to go to graduate school and study sports medicine, athletic training. And then Gray and I got connected again. I mean, the story goes that Gray knew I was in the same field as him, and he was starting a clinic in our hometown. And to be honest, Robbie, there's no way in the world I wanted to move back to our hometown. I was like, you know what? I'm not moving back there. Don't want to go back there. I'm out and I'm going to stay out. But Gray, and if anybody's heard Gray speak and talk, they know he can be pretty persuasive. So what happened, and I recommend this to anybody early in their career. The one thing that I did is, I've known Gray, like I said, all my life, but he asked me to come back there and work, and I really didn't want to do it. It was a good opportunity, meaning for someone right out of graduate school, starting a sports medicine program, doing outreach was a pretty good opportunity. So I called up his previous employer. So I said, all right, this guy, Gray Cook, he sounds a lot, but is he full of shit or is he for real, right? So I called up the guys he previously worked for and asked one of the physical therapists who worked there. I said, listen, Gray, I'm a graduate student getting ready to graduate. Gray wants me to come back and work. Tell me a little about what he's doing. I said, I know Gray personally, nothing personal, but is it worth me going back to a small town and working with this guy? And the physical therapist basically said, if you're right out of grad school, give him 2 years. You'll learn a ton. It'll be a great experience. He's got a different way of thinking, but it's really, really good. So I took that leap, and here we are 25 years later, still working together.
That 2 years turned into 25.
Exactly. That 2 years, I was like, all right, I'm going to give him 2 years. And it took me about 2 weeks to realize, holy shit, I don't know anything. He's really got a unique way of looking at things. So I was like, damn, I got to stick around this guy for a little bit longer.
Can I ask, what type of farm did you grow up on? Because my father, so I live in Dublin in Ireland. So Dublin's a city, but my father was from the country here in Ireland. And when I was a young kid, I lived these two lives, Lee. So I went to school in Dublin and I had friends and I played sport in Dublin, John. But any opportunity I had as a kid, I'd say from an accumulation standpoint, I used to spend about 5 months a year down the country for my holidays, between summer holidays and Halloween and Christmas and whatnot. Like the second night holidays, I was down the country because I was just fascinated with such a difference in the style of life from country to city. So I spent a lot of time on a farm, and it was a dairy farm. And I loved farming. So, but obviously it was nothing compared to the farms in America in terms of size. But was it a dairy farm, your farm?
No, it's a tobacco farm.
Oh,
so big tobaccos. We're in the heart of tobacco country. So, wow. We had a big tobacco. My family had a big tobacco farm, and so I went from pulling tobacco to basically tobacco is what put me through college to saying you shouldn't be smoking.
That's absolutely brilliant. Yeah. I can understand now why you wanted to get out there. I'm not going back to those fields.
Yeah, exactly.
Your influences. Now, obviously, this question I always ask about personal and professional. And obviously, you talk about Gray, you talk a little bit about your family. Obviously, that they're going to be there. And if they are in these following answers, that's fine. But if there's anyone else you want to mention, feel free to. So who's been your biggest influence on you, both professionally and personally in your life and career?
That's a good one. I think professionally, early on, obviously Gray, but Gray, obviously he thinks differently. I think the one reason him and I have clicked so well is I've been able to take a lot of his crazy ass ideas and try to filter them down and say, okay, here's how I think we can apply this practically. And I think that's one thing that we're able to do. But I think the one person that most people, I think more and more people are knowing about him now through his research is probably Kyle Kiesel. He worked with us early on, and it was Gray, myself, Kyle Kiesel, and Kyle was the one that I really, he was able, to really help me grow as more of a professional. So I think he was much more of a what I would say a traditional mentor for me early in my career, getting up. And then another person probably early on was not early on, a little bit later was John Tureen. John Tureen's
Indianapolis Colts.
Yeah. He's a strength conditioning. So I think my world being more sports medicine, the one thing Gray always did is say, if you're going to be in the sports medicine world, you need to go get your strength conditioning certification. So he pushed me to get my strength conditioning certification, but I was not a strength coach. Now I don't claim to be a strength coach. But surrounding myself with someone like John, who's a very, very good strength coach, allowed me to pick up and learn a lot from him. So I think, those two people would be two people that I would say early on, I'd say the first 5 to 6 years of my career actually helped me really grow as a professional. Then, of course, as we kind of get that foundation, then it's just, then you just try to go seek out anybody and everybody to kind of learn from and do, which is what we all do. And I think I'm very fortunate professionally to be able to go around and attend a lot of conferences, sit in and listen to what's going on, what's happening. So it's every time I get to go out and speak, I make sure that I'm sitting in and listening to what some other people have to say. But I think, early on, I think for any young professional out there, trying to surround yourself with someone who you connect with both personally and professionally. So I think both of those guys, both personally and professionally, I connected with quite a bit. So we obviously have Gray, but also Kyle and John. And then, of course, your family, always is, that's an easy answer. But of course, my wife, or, meeting her and her kind of, because let's be honest, when I was first starting to work with Gray, I was, like I said, I like to go out and have fun, and you're a double. I like to go out and have some beers. So really trying to get me on the right track to keep me more dialed in and think more professionally. So I definitely think my wife helped me get on that right path, which allowed us to do a lot of things we've done. So yeah, I'd say those are the one. And I think a lot of us, and Rob, you're probably no different. You blend those personal and professional relationships so much. Yeah. But a lot of the people that a lot of your best friends, a lot of my good friends are in the professional world. Another person that I think really allowed that I want to, speak to is Chris Poirier from Perform Better. I think he's someone that I think a lot of professionals, if you're in the sports performance world, especially as an up and coming speaker, presenter, you could look to say he's definitely have an influence. So I would say Chris Poirier is another one that both, again, personally and professionally has really taught me a lot and allowed me to both me personally, but also our organization allowed us to get our message out and helped us give us good advice along the way.
He's Mike Boyle's best friend.
Oh yeah, no question. Yeah.
That was great. I know, like to a listener now, they'd say, "Oh, like most top physical therapists nowadays, have some background in strength conditioning." But that was some foresight from Gray to tell you way back then to go get into S&C. Because we're talking about the late 90s, early 2000s there? Or?
Yeah, you're talking about like 96, 97 is when I got my
great foresight, wasn't it, from Gray? Like he was already seeing that, listen, where this was going in terms of it's just all going to become one. Like
That's right. And I think really some guys who laid that foundation, probably Gary Gray being a really person in that physical therapy world who knew that, training and, sports performance training and the sports medicine physical therapy world needed to mesh and needed to combine a little bit better. And Gray, again, like you said, having that foresight to realize that there needs to be that mesh, and his background being a little bit more in strength conditioning. But I think that's a huge benefit to where we are now compared to where we were. And it's still a lot of work to do, because I think, in my opinion, the biggest miss we have in the physical therapy world, in the sports medicine world, and the strength conditioning world is that gap between an injured athlete and returning to play. So the athlete's doesn't necessarily need physical therapy, but they're not ready to go in the weight room and work out right beside all the other athletes. It's that gap that's there, that a person having a background in strength conditioning, having a background in sports medicine, physical therapy can bridge that gap quite nicely. I still think that's a need. And having both of those backgrounds, you can definitely slide into that and understand both those worlds pretty well.
So what made you get into sports medicine and physical therapy? Like, why did you want to go study that? What was it? What was the light bulb moment? Like, that's the field I'm going to get into.
Probably like everybody else growing up. Again, I was into sports. I'd gotten injured. I suffered a few injuries along the way. And early on, I was thinking about going to medical school and doing the physician. It certainly didn't have I didn't have probably the smarts or the drive to that daunting task of spending all those years in school. And here I am now, I'm going to get my PhD. So I did it anyway. But being in sports, getting injured, having some of those people help me along the way, physical therapists, physicians, through those injuries. I was always interested in sports medicine, physical therapy. So going right into undergraduate school, as an athletic trainer, my first, where I really got into it was, starting to work with athletes, my freshman year in college. They basically, at that point, they would throw you out there and say, hey, you're the trainer for this team. I had no idea what the hell I was doing other than just having some first aid and just getting your hands dirty and being that interacting with athletes and helping them along that was the light bulb moment for me. I was interested in it. but knowing that, hey, I'm not good enough to play sports anymore, even though I still like to be around it, but being around athletes and being around that environment and having just a little bit to do with getting them back on the field. I think probably the biggest, I'll speak to this, Robbie, when I was a trainer for the track team, I think it was my freshman or sophomore year. And we had a really good sprinter, and he'd been battling hamstring problems, battling his hamstrings, which is not uncommon. And I'd really spent a lot of time working with him, and he ended up winning, he went up winning the conference championships, went on to the NCAAs and did real well in NCAAs. And he really, after he won a couple of those things, he really came back and thanked me and was very appreciative of me. And that was probably the biggest thing, is like, all right, I'm in the right place. Yeah. I felt like I was really helping him, and so did he. And I think that's when I really had my light bulb moment that this was going to be my career. That was my shining moment, saying, hey, wow, I really helped this guy to do what he wanted to do.
So I know the next thing I'm going to ask is probably going to sound like a pretty big question, but if someone just met you like on a plane, sitting there beside you, and just turned to you and they just said, what's your why? Why are you here? Like, what's your meaning in life? And you'd be like, oh, that's a pretty big question.
It is.
But let's just say, just like if someone just asks, like, what is your why? Like, what gets you up every day and gets you, like, it's funny because in some emails, when I email people like yourself, you have someone you mightn't see all the time, or you only connect with a few times a year, but you kind of touch base with them with an email or a text or give them a phone call. But whenever I email, I always write, I hope life is keeping you curious, excited, and intrigued, because I hope it is. I hope you're getting up every day and you're excited, because there is so much to know. But like anything, we can all get habituated and get a little bit down sometimes. And it's kind of like, just like, can step back a little bit and have a bit of perspective and go, do you know what? Like, this is like, there's so much to know. Like, there's so many curiosities in life that it pretty is awesome when you think about it. So I hope that, like, people are getting out of bed most mornings and like, they are trying to search their why, So what is your why, Lee Burton?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one, obviously we go through transitions in life, right? Absolutely. So you're in school and you're trying to take in all this information, and you enter your professional world. And I think early on my why was about going in and helping people, helping athletes, getting them back out on the field. That's really what I was passionate about. I worked with high school age athletes for my first 10 years. And I was at an inner city school. They didn't have any money. They didn't have anything, but I really enjoyed that. And I'd still be working there today. But I think what flipped is when Gray and I started going out and teaching. And I think I was able to, even with those high school athletes, I felt like I was starting to educate them more on how they needed to treat their own bodies better. And I think there was a moment, I can't really tell you there's a specific moment, but there's a moment where I realized I was just as much of an educator as I was a actual treater of injuries, so to speak. And I felt, when I realized that I was an educator, I felt my why would be more about how to educate other people to go out and do their job better.
Yeah.
And that's one reason that when I went into the university setting, I was a professor at university for a number of years. That's where I felt my why was, I really am passionate about it. And if you're passionate about something, you really like it, ultimately, I think you're going to be good at it. So whether I'm good at it or not, that's not for me to say, but I do enjoy doing it, and I'm very passionate about it. So I think my why is now about, and has been for a long time, whatever level, whether it's speaking with you on this podcast, whether it's going teaching a seminar, or whether it's teaching to a group of 10 students at a small university, it's about trying to help them help other people, give them a little bit of knowledge so they can then go out. And I think for me, knowing that by me touching one person, that one person is touching maybe 15 people. So ultimately, the one thing that I feel best about right now, knowing kind of where the journey Gray and I've been on, is that at the end of the day, we really hold true to be an education company. And we have ultimately touched a lot more people than we've actually come in contact with. So if my conversation at a conference that I spoke at this past weekend influences one person to go out and change and improve what they're doing to somebody else, that's what my why is knowing that I'm trying to help influence how somebody else interacts with their client, their patient, their athlete in a positive way. And for me, that's what I'm most passionate about right now.
Right. Well, I obviously can't have you on a podcast and not mention the function movement systems, FMS, SFMA, the functional capacity screen that recently came out in the last 2 or 3 years. Functional competency screen or the capacity screen. Right? Capacity,
Yep. You
capacity
got
screen.
it. You got it. All those acronyms, man, Robbie. It gets a little crazy. I get it. I get it.
FCS is it, or FCS?
Yep.
Yeah. See, I'm old school, so I was just FMS and SFMA, and then this new one came out all of a sudden. But I said this to you before we hopped online. And this isn't just limited to obviously the functional movement systems. It's every sort of organization that's putting forth some type of model or their model out there. There's always going to be misunderstandings, misinterpretations, and then what happens an awful lot of time is you get these criticisms that are based off false assumptions. And one of my favorite books, Lee, sorry, I know I ramble a bit, but I do get around to my questions.
That's all right.
One of my favorite books is by Don Miguel Ruiz, called The Four Agreements. And one of the agreements is to never make assumptions. And what that taught me was, like, don't make assumptions. Try to make sure that you have all the facts before you make any type of judgment. And I often find that criticisms that most people have of any situation, it's usually based off false assumptions. They don't have all the facts, and they've kind of just made up a little story in their head, and then they just start criticizing them. And the reason why they criticize, we could get into a whole other conversation there with things like self-worth. And, people, as Paul Chek would say, when you find your meaning in life, you don't need a crisis. I mean, you don't need to bitch and moan about other things because you're too focused on your passion, which you alluded to what yours was earlier on. But when it comes to the FMS, I'm going to give you a platform here. What is the message you do want people to walk away with from the FMS? Because I think, and I'll let you answer now, I think what happens an awful lot of times, it's the followers of the message that start to put out sort of misinterpretations rather than the actual people who put the message out in the first place, and that's where sort of you get the Chinese whispers where it gets back to the founder and he's like, that's actually not what I intended that to mean. So here's your platform.
Yeah, no, and I think it's kind of the nature. You alluded to it, Robbie. It's the nature of we got popular, and we've been around for a long time. This, I think a lot of people, hey, well, I just started reading you guys or heard about the movement screen. They don't realize that it's been around for 20 years. I mean, we first started screening people in 1997. Yeah. So it's been around.
You know what, Lee? Movement, movement is already out almost 10 years.
Yeah.
It's mad. Oh, yeah. I remember that came out.
Oh yeah, it's taken us it took us that long, basically 13 years to feel confident about putting it even in a book.
Yeah.
And I think the one thing that we want people to get across is that at the end of the day, all we're trying to do is to see where and if someone is ready to increase their activity level and look at movement in general. So looking at just movement, not looking at different pieces or parts of the body, but how the whole system works together, and simply try to determine, is this person ready to do this activity? That's it. And we developed a tool to do that. And we simply developed that tool, working with high school athletes to say, is this kid ready to go in the weight room and lift heavy weight, whether it's a bench press, whether it's an overhead press. And if they're not, then that's an exercise we probably don't need to give them. Mm-hmm. And I think from that point on, it took on a life of itself as people start talking about corrective exercise. To be honest, Robbie, it wasn't about corrective exercise for a long time. It was about, hey, this kid should not be doing an overhead press because his shoulders and his upper body is just not ready to do that. Yeah. So I think that's probably we have our logo, first move well, then move often. And it's always, and I think the one thing I think people twist up is when we say quality over quantity, it's just making sure they're doing it right before they do it a lot. And I think that's the simple message we try to get people to understand. Now, we could debate, and I have no problem. I think the critiquing is certainly warranted when you say, well, I don't like the way you do this test or that test. Hey, I have no problem with somebody debating that. But where I think everybody should agree on in this profession is, hey, we got to make sure they can do it right and do it well before we add load, before we have them do it a lot. Now, in sports, that's a different deal, right? You got to go out there and you got to play your sport. You got to do what you got to do. I've got to run a marathon next week. I'm training for a triathlete. Fine. But when they're in the weight room and we're training them, hey, let's make sure they're doing all these movements correctly. And I think that's where that's really our message. And I think that message gets lost, especially when you start talking about research and you got people saying, well, at the end of the day, I've seen blogs, I hate the functional movement screen. Okay, why? I mean, what is it about, if you hate the way we do our tests, fine. But philosophically, what most people, when they realize, and I think you alluded to that, Robbie, when you realize philosophically what we're trying to tell people and what our philosophy is, it's hard to disagree with it. You can disagree with the testing and maybe how we prescribe some of the exercise. That's everybody can disagree or agree, and we can debate that. But the fundamental philosophy is where Gray and I both will take issue. If you're saying you just need to go, have somebody train and not worry about how well they're doing it, that's a problem.
There was one time, and I'm going to paraphrase here, but Gray was on, I think it was the Strength Coach podcast, because, he's been on that a million times, and you've been on it a lot too. But it was one of the times I love when Gray gets a little bit fired up, do you know what I mean? Because usually he's always very calm, and sometimes though he's kind of like, listen, I'm an Irishman, so I'll swear. He's kind of just like, fuck it, that's it. I'm going with this one. But he basically said, and I'm going to paraphrase, he says, like, how dare I have to come up with the FMS? Because people just cannot get into the concept of, respect, movement quality. And again, you're completely correct. We all agree about movement quality. You have to move well before you can put strength and conditioning on top of that. You know what I mean? Nobody would disagree with that philosophy or the underlying principles of the FMS message. Again, where people get the hang-ups is it's the concepts or maybe the methods. But again, the underlying principles, or again, if you want to say the philosophy of the system, no one can argue with that. It's move well, then move often. And Charlie Weingroff, just that came to my mind too. Like, Charlie would often say, all I'm looking for is, can I put your joints into positions that can adapt, that I can load and adapt to stress? I think I'm slightly paraphrasing that, but that's kind of what Charlie says. Can I put your joints in positions that I can load and something adapt to stress? And it's just like, will people agree with that? And people's like, yeah. Is it safe to put your body in these positions to put load on it and then stimulate it and then adapt it? Yeah. And then it's just like, you go about that however way you want to go about that.
That's right. I mean, and I think that is the underlying message. And I think, early on we were working with Mike Boyle. This was probably the late 90s, early 2000s. We kind of introduced him to the screen. And I think that what was good about kind of what he did, even when this was, again, like 99, 2000, he was like, yeah, I get the screen, but I'm just going to train my guys. He liked the 7 patterns, and he basically just said, he, not literally, but what I think he did, and he said it later on. I heard him say this when he was doing a thing. He is, listen, I agree their 7 patterns are awesome, but if I'm training them the right way and making sure they're doing all these movements correctly, they should all pass the movement screen. And that's exactly kind of what Gray was saying. If you're a good strength coach and you're doing the right thing, the movement screen should just validate that you're doing the right thing. You should be able to add strength and endurance and power and all these things on a good platform. And I think the one thing I hear a lot of fitness professionals say is that they get intimidated by the movement screen. And here's why. They get intimidated by the movement screen because they know that a lot of their clients will fail it. And this is what people have told me. He goes, Lee, I just, because what if my people fail it? And I'm like, well, then you make them better. He goes, well, if I don't make them better? Well, then you're a shitty strength coach. I mean, if I identify, and again, there may be many reasons why. It may not be because of the exercises. It could be because they're sitting at the desk. It could be because they're running too much. But again, that's your job, is to try to figure those things out. We're just giving you a thermometer to figure out what your temperature is. It's up to you to get it back where it needs to be.
Yeah. I love the thermometer, or Gray often uses the blood pressure example as well, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Another big one for you. I say to you, you can engineer lifestyle for everyone across the world. So you can engineer it in a way. You can engineer it in a way where you think that it would maximize people's health through, like, maximizing their environment. So like, whether it's getting them more physically active or stuff like that. Maybe it's stand-up desks or sit-down desks or no desk, or people have to get up, like Katie Bowman type desk. I don't know if you're familiar with Katie Bowman. She has that, like, Move Your DNA, and she often, like, talks about, like, setting up your environment in a way so you won't actually need to have regimented exercise because you've gotten so much activity throughout the day. Like, so like Katie, for instance, has no furniture in her house, so she's like, I have to get up and down off the ground like 20 times a day. She's like, people haven't got off the ground in 20 years.
That's right.
So like she talks about how these movements, like how they actually are epigenetic inputs. They actually, like, change, like, cell expression and cell structure, and that they're actually very important, forces that need to go through our tissues to keep it healthy. So a tendon stays being a tendon, and a muscle stays being a muscle, and a nerve stays being a nerve, and, like, they're getting the proper inputs because she is actually setting up her environment in a way that she's having to move her body. If she was back out in the savannah thousands of years ago, you know, she had to do all these different movements. But obviously, because modern environment is so foreign to what the human species was used to up until, God knows, probably less than 100, 150 years ago, and definitely a few thousand years ago. But if you could engineer work environments, school environments, just even social environments to optimize people's health through movement, and if you want to go deeper on this in terms of circadian biology, like light exposure or food or
good
nutrition,
Lord.
or food and nutrition, you can go for it. But from a movement perspective, how would you engineer society?
No, I think kind of going along with what you were saying, I think there's got to be some level of quote unquote play, activity, where you just, you know, I think part of it is you got to watch how we quote unquote regulate it. Meaning, do we really want to regulate the government getting involved and all this? So I am a little.
Glee, do you mean Play-Doh for everyone? Like, I mean,
yes.
adults too. Like, because I think when people hear the word play, they just think, "Oh, I'll get the kids out," because everyone's talking about kids nowadays. They're like, "Oh, kids don't move and kids don't play."
Right.
It's like it's adults giving out. In my head, I was like, "But you don't either." Like, they're looking at you. You're the role model. You're there. Oh, kids don't play, and they're looking at the adults looking at their iPhone.
I mean, I think structured working out is great. I mean, that's the business we're in. But I think on some level, when I say play, like activity, doing something to get your heart rate up, create an environment where it is fun, where you are doing different activities, getting up and getting down. So I think that's good for the adults. But where I would go with it, and you just said it with kids, and not so much just saying, "Oh, kids don't work," but I think what we have an opportunity to do, and what I think we can do, is if we can change the thought process of these kids. And if we just start with like 4, 5, 6-year-old kids and along their educational process, start instilling with them that it's just part of what you do is you're doing some type of structured, quote unquote, structured activity every day. And if we start that and just say, this is part of what you're doing, because on some level, yeah, we want to try to change what the adults are doing, but you get 50, 60, 70 years old. This is who you are, right? We can change your environment, but you're going to be dialed in. But I think over a lifetime and let's say generation, let's just say we start with a group of kids who are 5 and 6-year-olds right now today. And we just start saying, okay, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, we've got physical education. Now, physical education, not as in roll a ball out there and let them play basketball, but educating them in the right way on maintaining their physical activity, letting them know 4 or 5, and it just becomes part of what they do.
Yeah.
So
it becomes breakfast to them, like.
It's right. It's just, okay, every day I've got to do this, and this. So when they're 14, 15, and it follows them all the way up to the time they're 20, 25, that it's just, okay, I've got to do this. And one, we're going to put them on the right path, but that's a cultural shift that I think we can make, that over the long term, that generation, I think that's what it's going to take. And I think that can happen. I think it's just going to take one, I think here's where I get into the politics of it. I think because musculoskeletal injuries are creating such a problem and costing everybody around the world so much money, they're going to start dedicating more resources to it. And the best place to dedicate resources to it is to start engineering the kids and training the kids the right way. And again, it's not about training them. It's not about, let's go in the weight room and training. It's about getting them to understand the only way to really have an impact long-term is to improve your physical education and physical activity. Yeah. And that can be coming through a variety of things. So to me, that's where I would say, what I'd like to say, if I could engineer something, it's getting people on the right track then. Obviously the adults, getting them to do more activity, but I'm not sure how much we can impact that. I think we can have an impact on changing that thinking and changing the culture that way.
Absolutely. It's funny you said that, because I recently interviewed Jeff and Mickey Martin from the Brandex method, and their whole thing is like, you could say their whole thing is long-term athlete development, but they would actually say they're in the realm of long-term human development.
Correct.
And we actually had the exact same discussion in that, we kind of said, adults don't move. And then like I kind of, at the end of that sort of segment of the podcast, or that section of the podcast, I said, well, I suppose really what we're trying to do is it is the kids we want to go after, because then it'll be the kids as they turn into adults, they'll have this background of, oh, this is just what I do every day, activity and staying active, and I enjoy it. So that they'll be the generation generation that changes for all generations to come after that, you know. So exactly. And I definitely think, you know, there's two things I want to mention to you here. James Fitzgerald from OPEX, I mean, that's his whole mission as well. And I really think a lot of his work would really resonate with you and the guys at the Functional Movement Systems. He's just on an absolute mission, like in terms of just trying to, you know, he's the kind of the guy who'd use the phrase fitness should just be like breakfast every day. And you know, and it's getting it out of your head that fitness is just regimented in the gym, you know what I mean? If it's just hiking into your 90s with your family and gardening and, you know, cycling a bike. Because Lee, I always joke, do you ever meet those people in your life and they're just winners? And what I mean by that is, like, they're in your head, you're like, this person knows nothing about exercise or nutrition, you know, like nothing educational wise, but yet they're happy, they're fit, they're robust. Everyone loves being around them. They're great in the community. They're always cycling, hiking, going on trips. They're always the first person in if someone needs a help or a hand. You're just like, this person's just winning. Like, what are they doing? Like, and it's just that they just have this, they're just active and they understand like what good food is and not good, but there's no hang-ups about it. I think we get too regimented in this sort of like, you know, it has to be 3 sets of 10 and then it becomes torturous type thing, you know. And the fact is that a lot of people who go to the gym are actually sedentary. It's kind of like, I don't know about you, but I've got so many friends and they think they're highly active because they go to the gym 4 times a week. And they might train hard for those 4 hours they're in the gym during the week. But I was like, what do you do with the other 164 hours?
That's
like,
right.
Oh, you know, nothing. But the other thing I was going to say to you was, it was on the top of my head there. Brand X. Oh, it's going to come to me now. James Fitzgerald, OPEX. What was I going to say to you? Oh, hopefully it'll come back to me now in a second.
All right.
It's the dehydration. That's what it is. Yeah. That's what we're down to. It'll come back to me, and when it comes back, I'll ask you. But moving on here. In terms of optimizing human movement, so if somebody like really just wanted to understand human movement and engineering it, what fields of study do you think are crucial? You know, so what I've been studying a lot lately is actually going back. Well, I'm actually doing a lot of anatomy physiology, but even like just understanding embryology and the development of the human. You know, I'm not sure if you're familiar with PRI. You know, and their big thing, obviously, they're showing like, you know, the asymmetry of the body and, you know, how that can impact how us as a species move and stuff like that. But in terms of just fundamental fields, if someone said to you, listen, I want to get into this field, what would you recommend just from a basic, good scientific foundation? What sort of fields should I look into?
I think the one thing that gets overlooked a lot, because the anatomy, physiology, applied biomechanics, those things are like a gift. Like, check that box. You definitely want to just at least have that underlying knowledge. I think the one thing is doing some good motor learning, motor programming, that neurodevelopmental aspect. I think motor learning, just getting some good solid backgrounds in motor learning, because I think that's, again, understanding a little bit more about that gets overlooked. And that neurophysiology piece.
Yeah.
Because I think when we talk about movement principles, movement is driven from the brain. And I think understanding that, and then how we pick up these patterns and how we, you know, learn different patterns and how we can train those patterns, I think, you know, overlooking and not enough people have a good understanding of motor learning, motor programming, that neurophysiology piece.
I have it here. I remember I was going to ask. I wrote it down in my notes, but just before I do ask it, I have it down here. So I actually have it here: study of embryology, anatomy, physiology, and then the other bit I want to ask: how much credence would you put onto psychology? Because I know there is a whole field of like actual, like, you know, psychology and movement, and kind of like Feldenkrais, you know, a little bit of that, and, you know, certain other individuals look into it. Like, there's some work from like a guy called William Reich, a German guy. I never looked into it, but I heard Ellie Holtz mention him, and, like, you know, he was big on like these, he called them psychosocial kind of posture.
I'm glad you brought that up, Rob, because I definitely think that's something that we've started to look into. One of the research studies that was done early on the FMS was on the Marines, and looking at guys who scored lower. And this research has been out there for this, probably 8 to 10 years old. So the guys scored lower got injured more, but the guys that dropped out of basic training. But what it also found is the guys that scored lower dropped out of basic training for any other reason. The only thing they found was you were 2.5 times more likely to drop out if you had a low movement screen score. Yeah. So it had nothing to do with injuries. So the thinking was that is some type of psychosocial and behavioral aspect. One of the things we started looking at is because movement is behavior. Again, it goes back into the brain and the psychosocial aspect. So it is about behavior, just like your blood pressure is going to fluctuate day to day based off a lot of other factors.
I don't know if you've read that. So I'm just showing, for the listeners, I know you can't see this, but I'm showing Lee.
Write that down.
Robert Sapolsky's book Behave. It's just because I've been in depthly studying the book, Lee, since last September. I have over 200 A4 pages of notes from this book.
Who's the author?
Robert Sapolsky. His whole behavior course is free on YouTube, just to let you know, like the whole thing.
Yeah, I would definitely check that out. So one of the things we've been looking at is trying to determine if you, so for example, do you think a normal person should be able to do this movement? And let's just say touch your toes. Do you think you should be able to touch your toes? Yes or no? All right. And if you say, yeah, I should be able to, but can't touch your toes, even though you think you can, what does that then do? Are you more likely to have injuries? We think you would. So if you can't do something, but you think you can, then that probably leads you to try to do more things than you actually should be able to do. Mm-hmm. Versus the person who says, no, I can't do that. I can't touch my toes. And they bend over and they can touch their toes. How does that person then behave, and what do they do as it relates to their environment? Yeah. So just taking those two different types of responses to those questions, we're actually doing some little research project on that right now, collecting that data. And something as simple as, touching your toes. Something as simple as touching your toes. What does that look like? Not even stand on one foot, squatting. Do you think the normal person should be able to squat? No, they shouldn't be able to do that. That behavioral piece, and I wrote that book down, right, because I definitely have to look at that. That behavioral piece is, there's something to that. I'm not sure what it is as it relates to movement, but there's something to it. Something that definitely has to be looked into more.
Yeah. And again,
the whole grit thing. People who are more gritty.
Angela Dowork, I just read her book recently as well. Yeah. Which talks about the guys from West Point, and they had all these like questionnaires. It's like, I like the main guys at West Point were like, why are these people who shouldn't be dropping out or dropping out? You know, because they had all the credentials at their resume. But like when they brought in the grit scale, then they were like, oh, these guys aren't gritty at all. But I think again, and the underlying principle there is that all of that stuff is input to the system. Like I think a lot of people get very boxed into like hands-on therapy, like needling or ART or whatever it is, or chiropractic adjustment. Like they see that as input to the system. But it's like how you word something, like how someone hears something going into their like how you say words, and it goes into their vestibular, and that can impact vestibular because of how they heard it, whatever, or visual, or all those sensory inputs. It's all input, and how that can influence then the behavior, the output then of the system. So it's fascinating. But sorry, the question I was going to ask you, Lee, sorry, the one earlier on, going back to, we were kind of talking about long-term athlete development. I'd talked about like engineering society and movement. This is the second point I want to bring. So the first point was saying about checking out Brandex and OPEX, James Fitzgerald. But the sports system set up in America is another thing too, because a lot of the kids, they're kind of, they're like, this goes back to like changing culture that you mentioned. Like they're nearly brainwashed, and I don't mean like not in a sinister way, but they're brainwashed that like training is so they get better at a sport. And then what happens is, even if they make sport in college but don't play pro, and even if they do play pro, like after that, what do they do then? Like they were never educated. Like their whole lives was, I did exercise to get better at this, and now I don't do that anymore. And it's kind of like they were still never educated on making fitness part of their life as well. So like that's another part of the cultural sort of re-engineering that needs to be taken into consideration. That was
I mean, I think right now there's only a few places in few states, and I think it's only maybe, let's say three to five states that physical education is still mandatory in the U.S.
Wow.
Yeah, it's insane. Now a lot of schools still have physical education, but physical education has become just, hey, let's roll a ball, and let's, like you just said, we're going to play a sport. We're going to go play whatever sport.
Well, it's the same here. I see it too. Yeah. I see it too. I see PE here in Ireland, and it's disgraceful. Yeah. Like, you know what I mean? And like it's a PE teacher. He goes out in the yard and he has a football, and all the lads play it, and all the girls are sitting off on the side there. You know what I mean? And they'll say, "Oh, I don't want." Like, there's no variety, there's no excitement about it. There's no movement literacy. You know what I mean? Whereas, if you got someone like you know, like I'm not saying like Erlen Core, but if you got someone with that passion in, like, you know what I mean, who would just expose kids to something else, it's a big mission.
It's a big mission, and that's why I say it has to be a cultural shift. But what I don't understand is there's so much research and so much data saying that physical fitness and physical education improves your lifestyle, improves your thinking, cognitive skills. Your test scores are better. The fact that they keep pushing that aside is just unreal. But I think it's getting so bad that there's going to be a shift. So the pendulum has swung to where it's so bad that I think it's going to start swinging back. And hopefully when it swings back, that it swings back where it's more about physical education, less about sport development.
What do you think the mean FMS score of all the United States Congress would be?
About a 9, about 8.
I wonder what Donald Trump's FMS would be. And the trunk spilly push-up, not a chance. Leg raise, not a chance.
Yeah, he may tell you it's better than what it is. I'm sure of that.
Yeah. Can he? Of course, I can touch my toes.
Of course. Yeah.
Listen, I won't keep you too much longer. We've got about 10 minutes, so this has been a phenomenal conversation. Well, you know, like nearly all my guests, but particularly with someone like yourself, we could chat all day. But I'm gonna ask you some little. I say these are rapid fire round. Then when I ask people, these aren't rapid fire round. These are thinking questions. But you
want the first thing that comes to my head. I got it.
Yeah. Well, no, listen. You can think about these as much as you want. The biggest lessons you've learned in your career and life. Your facial expression, JJ.
Oh God, the biggest lessons.
Like, and again, it could be 1, could be 2, could be 3. Like, so, like, yeah. If you were to like leave a lesson behind. I've got some great answers on this. Probably the best one I ever got was Bill Hartman. He's like, be very careful who you marry.
Be very careful who you marry. That's a good one. I'd say don't be afraid to take a risk.
Nice.
Take a risk. I mean, whether it's learning something new or whether it's trying something different, whatever it is, don't be afraid to take a risk. I think that's what's helped me out quite a bit. Is I'm not scared to go out there and try something different.
Definitely. A personal question from me. Now, this actually isn't rapid fire. This is something I did want to ask you. You do so much travel, and I'm always intrigued by people who do so much travel. What do you do to self-regulate? Like, you know, just your health and your body. What do you do from an exercise, nutrition, sleep standpoint? What sort of strategies do you have in place?
Well, one, I'm a big sleeper, and I'm not joking when I say that. I try to get 8 to 10 hours of sleep a night. And again, that's when I'm home. When I'm traveling, that's going to vary because obviously when you travel, you've got to go out and do the entertainment thing. And again, it's a good. So if I go to, if I'm going to Ireland to speak at a conference, after the conference is over, things aren't over. There still has to be a time where you interact with people that are there and things like that. But I think as far as traveling, I mean, I'm going to Korea. I come home. I go to Korea. As an example, I go to Korea at the end of this month, and then basically. A week later, I go back to Tokyo, come home, I go to Rome, come home, I go back to Germany. So over the next probably 2 or 3 months, I've got a lot of travel. So I try my best to get on their wherever time zone as quick as I can and try to hydrate myself as much as I can. So I drink plenty of water. The problem is some of these countries like Asia, they don't have a lot of water. I mean, and it's funny, but they don't. Everybody's drinking tea, right? So I drink a lot of. So I think one, I try to get as much sleep as possible, and I try to keep hydrated as much as possible.
Yeah.
Those are the two probably the biggest things for me personally. The one thing that has helped me probably over the last, and if you've seen me, if you follow me a little bit, I lost probably 25 pounds. And the one thing that I did is I started, and again, this is for me personally. You asked me personally.
Yeah.
I think the one thing that has helped me kind of get my health more in tune nutritionally was I do intermittent fasting. And I think
16/8 or do you?
I'll do 24 during the week, whereas basically I try to eat between 5:30 and 7:30 at night. So I'll eat dinner and then cut it out and drink water throughout the day. The other times when I'm traveling, I try to do 6 to 8 hour fasting. Mm-hmm. So to me, that has helped me. And then obviously trying to do the only other thing I'll say is I don't train or exercise when I'm traveling. I try to simply do stretching, just more call it regeneration, whatever you want to call it. Just some basic stretching, flexibility, mobility stuff, just to kind of keep my body a little bit more limber. But I think, it's tough. There's no question. It is not easy. I'd say hydration and sleeping, and trying to get on whatever time zone. Because over the next couple of months, I'll be all over the world, really.
And answer me this: do you still enjoy all that travel, Lee? Like, do you see yourself doing much long? That's what I love, the honesty. I love the honesty.
No way, man. Here's the thing.
But surely at this stage, sorry to cut in, but surely at this stage, you're in such a position. Like, you are one of the co-founders. You don't have to do all that travel.
You're right. We could always get. It's hard because right now, you said, part of what I've been trying to do is talk about more the fundamental capacity screen. So I'm teaching that in different places because we have instructors all over the world. So it's about going around and doing that. We are one of the things that's made it more difficult over what's coming up the last year or so is, one, we're introducing the fundamental capacity screen, but the other, Gray has really been working on different corrective exercise strategies. So we're going to be pushing out later this year a whole new way to improve movement through looking at awareness, breathing, control. So it's a whole different philosophical approach, and not different exercises, because the exercises are, the same. A lot of them are, but some of them are different, but a whole different approach. So going around and reintroducing that. And at the end of the day, Robbie, when I say I don't like traveling, I love teaching. I love interacting.
I'm the same, man.
I love educating. I have no problem. When I'm there, I really like interacting with people. I really like the education piece. That's what drives me. So it's two separate. If you could just take me and stick me over in Tokyo, great. But the flight and the time.
I say the exact same thing. It's like, I love when I'm there. It's the getting to there bit.
Right.
It's the bit in between.
And that's what I tell people. You're not paying me to come and teach you. I'll do that for free. You're paying me to get on a plane and fly 12 hours. And that's what you're paying me to do. It's
my family and all that type of stuff. Another, it's funny when you were answering the question about the influences earlier on, you were talking about Kyle and John Tureen and obviously Gray and stuff like that. A question popped into my mind, and I meant to ask at the time. How do you avoid groupthink in those situations? Because you know the way you said, like, our best friends or mates are usually within our sphere. We're all in sort of the same thing. But sometimes you get into that trap of, we all think the same way, we all agree, and then you don't really challenge one another. So it's called groupthink. Like, how do you guys avoid groupthink?
I'd say I think the one thing that has allowed us to maintain our relationship is the fact that we don't all think the same. Fundamentally, we have the same philosophy, right? And that's been what we do. But we do challenge each other, and the behind the scenes, there are some pretty big fights. We get into it pretty good. So I think when we go out there in public, and even if you've seen Gray and I speak in public together, we'll disagree quite often. And I think where we disagree is how we apply some of the information. So he's got his own way, and I've got my own way. So we definitely butt heads, and I think that's what even kind of our internal group. We have our kind of conversations, and we bring in like even our instructors. So all of our instructors, they're very diverse. So we don't want, and we really try to get people who have different backgrounds, people who bring different thoughts. And, that's what has allowed us to continue to change. Even though people say, well, the FMS has been the same for a while. Well, the FMS fundamentally, it's like, testing your power. Well, testing your power, there's ways to test your power, but how you fix that power, that's always changing. So how we fix movement and how we approach movement, that's always changing. And I think just all of us, even though we all have fundamentally the same philosophy, we don't always agree, and we definitely have our fights and our disagreements.
I just realized there, I said functional capacity. It's the fundamental capacity.
Fundamental, yeah.
As you're saying, all these goddamn names, functional movement screen, select
exactly. Hell, I can't keep them straight, Robbie.
Fundamental capacity screen. Is there anything you do in your daily that's essential to your day?
You're
gonna say coffee, aren't you?
No. I know a lot of people meditate. I do think on a degree, because I'm in the car about 30 minutes, 45 minutes every day. And I think that's kind of my especially in the afternoon. So as an example, a lot of people listen to podcasts. I'd say that 20, 30 minutes between the time I leave my office and between the time I get home, I kind of shut everything down, and that's my meditation. And I think that's kind of my, with all the chaos we have throughout the day, I don't want to say exercise, because I think I can get around, but I think that little 30 minute of just shutting everything off and just kind of not thinking too much, that kind of meditation is probably one thing. And then for me, I think the other thing is, and again, I don't know whether it's me personally, but it's just, I drink a ton of water. I think that's the other thing for me. If I go a couple hours, 3 hours, and I start getting that dry mouth, that's me personally, but I think the meditation is something to that. Just that shutting everything down, not just not focusing on any one particular thing.
You remind me of Gary Schoenfeld. He said that when he goes to work, he used to listen to a podcast. Education, because it was getting his mind ready to coach for the day. And then he said when he went home, he would listen to something that made him a better husband. Or person, because he was getting ready to be Gary, now the father and husband, on the way back. And I also thought that was good. So I can kind of see when you're going home, you're trying to shut down and be like Lee, the person, rather than being Lee, the physical therapist or coach. So I think that's a very good thing. What would be one top resource you would recommend? And the resource could be anything. It could be a book, a podcast, a course, an individual people should go see. And I know a lot of people turn this question back at me and say, well, it depends on where someone is in their life. But let's just say you had to leave one resource where you think anyone could benefit from. What would it be?
Oh, man. I'm trying to think one of the more recent books off the top of my head. Because that's one thing I think, hey, gosh, Robbie, you called me on that one, man. And that should be an easy thing to think about, but
no, again, it depends on where you are. That happens to me. Sometimes I could give you an answer straight away, and other times it just depends. Maybe I haven't.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get, obviously getting more education and this and that. That's really what you're trying to be. But I think it's some self-help books, Happiness Equation. I think that's just, I think generally some looking at certain self-help books. Happiness Equation, 7 Habits of Effective People. There's another one, that I just got done reading. I was on vacation last week and I got done listening. I listened. But I think generally speaking, that's the one thing that I didn't do until later in life that I wish I'd have done earlier in my career is more self-help, personal development books, and a variety of them. 100%. Not just don't read just one, because there was a time where I was reading Malcolm Gladwell, just absorbing everything that guy wrote. And I think you want to be getting more diverse and read, okay, this author, that author, and just get everybody's different perspective. And I think that's true. But I think the self-help stuff, as much as early in my career, I was like, I don't need that stuff. I think I wish I could go back and tell the young professional Lee Burton to listen to some of that stuff.
Which leads me now into my next question. What is your top book recommendation, and what are you currently reading? And again, just I'm not talking about book, like Lee, I don't know if you probably got a bit more sense in this conversation. Like, it's kind of like I really don't want books like in our industry. I want any you kind of touched on it there yourself. Talking about personal development books, because some people think I'm talking about a book within training or rehab. It's like it can be anything you want, but it doesn't just have to be limited to those fields.
Yeah, no, I'm reading The Compound Effect right now, or listening to it.
Very, very good.
The Compound Effect, Jumpstart Your Income, Your Life, Your Success. So again, another little business, self-help. And that's the one thing that I've listened to probably the last 5 or 6 years, because we're running a business now. Yeah. So more business development, things like that. And then, so if it's that would be, and then, I think again, I've always really liked the Malcolm Gladwell stuff, and because again, Mindset was a good one. I've got my library right here. Leaders Eat Last. That was a good one.
Simon Sinek,
yes. Leaders Eat Last is a good one.
Harari's third book. So Harari wrote *Sapiens* and *Homo Deus*, and his new book is *21 Lessons for 21st Century*. So *Sapiens* and *Deus* are phenomenal. So *Sapiens* was basically about all of human history of Homo sapiens, from when Homo sapiens came about to the present. And then Deus is what he predicts where we're going. So like it was like Sapiens brought you from the past to the present, and then Deus brought you from the present to what he predicts in the future. So like his big thing in the future is like he believes like a lot of like human economy is going to go towards biotechnology and like longevity, and like people like regenerating their bodies constantly and living to like, you know, thousands. Like that's gonna be where a lot of people are going to put their money first. And like, what issues is that going to cost us
that's interesting.
Yeah, to like society, you know, because we're gonna have too many people on the planet and stuff, and it's just like he's got some great topics in the book. Like one really interesting one is like he's like human rights, they don't actually physically exist. So he's like, you know, if you took a body like a dead body and cut it open, he's like, no physical rights in here. He's like, it's actually made up. But he's like, but it's a good thing. Like he's like, I'm not saying that it's a bad thing. Like he's like, it's a good thing that we made up, but just realize it actually really, we just agree that it exists. It doesn't exist. So like he plays all these mind things.
That's out there. That's pretty. Yeah.
Like he used another example of like Citroen, the car company. He's like, you think about Citroen, the car company? He's like, it doesn't exist. Like it's just like Citroen. We just decide it's like. He's like, Really, it's just he goes down like those rabbit holes, and they're phenomenal. Like, you know, so. Yeah, they're really, really good books.
I think I'm going to get this book, Behave. That sounds pretty good. I'm going to.
Oh, it's phenomenal.
That's the next one I get.
I'll tell you what I'll do after we finish here. I'll send you his 15-minute TED Talk on that book.
Do that.
It's very, very, very good. Sapolsky. Last two questions for you. You have 1 year left on planet Earth. Now you're not dying. You're just leaving. Let's say you're getting on a Starship Enterprise, but you're never coming back to Earth. And it's just you now, so the family have to stay. What would you do with that last year on Earth?
1 year
left on planet Earth.
Left on planet Earth. Oh man. I would 1 year on planet Earth, then I'm leaving. So I would definitely, I would definitely, even though I said I hate traveling, I would definitely travel around to some of the places that I've been, that I've gone to, but I haven't been able to spend much time there. So for example, if I go to, let's just say I go to Germany, if I'm going to go to Germany, I'm usually there, spend about 2 days and leave. I'd want to go to certain places and actually spend some time and interact with the people there and the cultures, the different cultures, and how they look at the difference in how people live and how people interact. Fundamentally, the one thing I have learned by traveling around, we're all the same. We all get up, we go to work, we have our families, we do that. But there are these little intricacies about everybody's culture and society that they do differently.
Yeah.
And even as far as, you go to some cultures and they have a specific way that they're going to sit around a dinner table. And just knowing and seeing those little things, I think really intrigued me. And I think spending more time in a lot of these places that I really enjoy being, I would really want to do that. And then, and by doing that, trying to make myself better, even though I've only got a year. So how can I use everyone else's experiences and how they live to improve my own experiences? Yeah. So that's one thing I'd probably say. If I had a year, that's what I would do.
Just quickly before I ask the last question, because you just touched on something there that I've come to too, is that the more I travel around the world, the more I realize a lot of similarities that we do have. Just from all the travel you've done around the world, what has that taught you about yourself?
I think it's one thing it's taught about myself is that I do feel confident in my ability to get along with people and be able to interact with everybody. Is that's probably what I've realized more than anything. I feel confident I can go anywhere around the world and I can get stuck there and I'll figure it out. I'll be all right.
Because one thing, Lee, that I kind of meditated on an awful lot on was so like the 3 big things I've meditated on over the last 3 years was debt and uncertainty, imposter syndrome, and happiness and fulfillment was my big one last year. But when I did my last big travel where I was at Arizona with Altus, my big thing was like about this whole question about like imposter syndrome of like, why do we feel we need to like self-validate ourselves by having to go to all these other places around the world? And it's kind of like The Alchemist. I just recently read The Alchemist, and the end of the book's kind of like what the boy was searching for was already in his hometown, the gold.
Yeah.
And the whole thing was that the whole essence of the book is that like, what you're already searching for, you already have. And it's kind of like we need to actually go through this hero's journey around the world to realize, I just like spent all my life savings to realize that everything I need to know is right here in my heart.
Yeah.
So that's right. Kind of why I wanted to ask that, because you're so well traveled. I was thinking that maybe you've gone around the world and go, you know what? everything I need is actually just right here at home, like my family, my wife, my kids.
Oh yeah, there's no question. I mean, I don't, Gray and I both, I'm still living in my hometown. I mean, that's where we're based out of now. And this is where I am. I like it. I love it. But I do like going outside of this little ecosystem I've got right here, and knowing and seeing, like I said, just those little intricacies in different places around the world are pretty interesting. And just, I think we all would benefit a little bit by seeing what other people's cultures are like. But yeah, when you get all said and done, there's nothing like home.
Yeah. What is a day in the life of Lee Burton like? When you're at home?
Yeah, when I'm at home, I get up. I do pretty much what I think most people my age probably do. I get up. I fix my kids' lunches for the day. And I take my son to school. I drop my son off, and I carpool. So I got 3 or 4 other kids in my car. I come into the office. I'm usually here by 7:30 in the morning. Really? Usually get here and start, answering emails, have meetings. Most of my typical day for me is I'm on the phone probably 60% of the time.
Are you seeing meetings? Do you see any patients, Lee?
No, well, I'd say once every few weeks.
Okay.
Not a lot. Not now. I mean, Gray and I will see a few people here and there that come in as consulting. I mean, we have a clinic next door.
Yeah.
But we don't see, more athletes, more consulting work. I'd say I'm more running a business now than doing that stuff. Data, looking at research, looking at data, so we can continue to move forward. But that's probably more of what I'm doing is having meetings with committees, having meetings with, I just had a 2-hour meeting with Gray before this podcast on some things we're trying to push out. So that's the type of thing, just, tweaking what we're doing.
More acronyms to remember. More
acronyms. God, I hope not.
All right. This is the very, very, very last one, I promise. I'm over in your neck of the woods and I say, Lee, I really want to bring you for dinner and your family, okay? So they don't count as the guests.
Yep.
But I say to you, you can bring 5 people to this dinner and they can be dead or alive. Who would you invite to this dinner and why? So 5 people, dead or alive.
Jesus.
Nice. The man himself.
The man. If you can tell me, if I can bring anybody, I want to bring Jesus.
Yeah.
You gotta. I mean, can
you
imagine talking to that guy?
Oh, I'll tell you one thing. He's way more tan than all those statues make him out to be.
Exactly. Him, Gandhi.
Very nice.
Just these philosophers and these people. Einstein.
Yeah.
So Jesus, Gandhi, Einstein. We got to go deep now. We need to get some of these Greek philosophers. I'll probably get the names wrong.
Socrates,
Da Vinci,
nice.
Yeah, Da Vinci, Socrates. Yeah, those guys. I mean, can you imagine just to sit around the conversation talking to those guys?
Yeah.
I mean, I'd want to go deep. I'd want to get those guys and just have a chat.
Yeah, awesome. Lee Burton, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'll say goodbye to you offline, but for all of the listeners, before we go, excuse me, I'm being very ignorant here. Where can people find out more information about the FMS?
Thanks. Right. Yeah, go to functionalmovement.com. We got a ton of resources. We got a lot of free resources, a lot of videos, a lot of media. We have a YouTube channel, Functional Movement, or FMS. FMS is a YouTube channel. So those 2 places are just a ton of resources there to check us out.
I'll put every link in the show notes, like the website, the YouTube, the Facebook, the Twitters, whatever it needs. And just for listeners, I'm certified, so I'm biased. I'm FMS 1-2, SFMA 1-2. That fundamental capacity screen screw me up. I haven't actually done that yet, but see, I'm one of the old books. That's only out. That's only for the young books are more up to tune into that. Which right. I must actually get around to actually doing that too, because I know Phil Fisky put a lot of work into that. So he did.
Yeah, he did. Definitely had to get you to do it.
Yeah, and I'm also on the membership site just for the people listening. And it's a fantastic resource. I mean, it's tons and tons of resource in that. One person we actually didn't mention here, who's an absolute genie, Greg Rose.
Oh yeah,
what another great bloke that you guys have involved, which is.
Oh yeah, we're very lucky to have Greg, Phil Plisky, Kiesel. I mean, we got a really nice little team here.
Great stuff. Lee, I'll say goodbye to you offline, but for the listeners, as I've been saying, you're spoiled rotten people with all this information that you get to your earbuds. But for everyone listening right now, I'll talk to you all soon. Peace.